Hello everybody and welcome back to the Fortress of Solitude. Today we're going to be checking out Absolute Batman issue 2 by Scott Snyder, Nick Dragotta and Frank Martin. The Absolute Batman story continues as Bruce's traumatic past is further revealed, with Scott Snyder doing the absolute take on Bruce's fear of bats, as the room his father locked him and the other children in when a gunman attacked the Gotham Zoo is actually the bat enclosure, and it's filled with the creatures. Nick Dragotta really took this sequence and just elevated it above just, showering a kid with a bunch of bats. This is like a horror movie. It's splashed with these great blacks and reds thanks to Frank Martin's colors, and the paneling is so well constructed. Like, the first panel is Bruce trying to open the door to get out, but he can't because his father's corpse is the thing keeping the door closed. And it's kind of separated down the middle where Bruce is on the left side and his dead father is on the right. It's so cool and so traumatic. After the bats in the room smash out of their enclosure and overwhelm Bruce, we return to the present where Batman is back fighting the party animals again. This time violently taking down the gangs as Alfred continues to surveil the masked vigilante from afar, often helping out in unseen ways so that Batman can keep attacking the gangs, and then the gangs in return will escalate the situation, which then gives him more hard data on them. I really like that Alfred is very impressed with Bruce and how much he plans out everything, something which seems to be an unheard of thing in this world since he's so enamored and fascinated by it. And he's found this sort of kindred spirit in Bruce, and that's a really interesting take on the usual dynamic, as Alfred, in the mainline comics and every time we've always seen him, he has believed in Batman in some way and what he does, and to see him begin to come round to that idea here of Bruce using his skills to take out the gangs is just so cool. After Batman takes down a literal army at the Gotham Aquarium by turning the water around them into hydrochloric acid, which causes the gang to run out into the arms of the arriving cops, Batman doesn't stick around and instead heads to one of his quote-unquote caves, as Alfred calls them. Small caches of weapons and resources that Batman has scattered around the town, and as Alfred is surprised to find, he's tracked them all down, and when he maps them all out on a map, he finds they actually form the symbol of a bat, the giant bat that's on Batman's chest. And this is the stuff that we've seen before in comics where Batman is nothing if not consistent when it comes to the branding of his, the bat symbol on things. And it's large scale stuff like this that we've seen. We've even seen it in movies where he's burning big bat symbols into buildings and stuff like that. And it's always really fun because it's just so very theatrical and over the top. And here it's no different. I just like that they all spell out a big giant bat symbol across, he's branded the city with the bat symbol. It's so cool. Scott also delivers some more awesome world building, citing that while Bruce works by day, it's possible that he could be part of the Red Hood, which in this universe is a resistance group running around Gotham. It doesn't say what they're a resistance group against, whether it's the government, even though the government in Gotham doesn't really seem to be all that well put together. It's very strange what the Red Hood actually is. We don't actually get to see what they actually are. Could they be a resistance against the Legion of Superheroes, or whatever Darkseid is doing, a larger scale thing that Bruce is seemingly unaware of at the moment? Who knows, and I hope we actually find out. It's going to be really damn cool to see the Red Hoods of this universe. Alfred figures that he's not really a joiner and isn't probably part of that group, as he's been following Bruce for quite a while now and find that he usually sticks to himself and to a very strict schedule. However, he often breaks that every couple of weeks when he goes to Blackgate, where he goes to meet Joe Chill, his father's killer, and kind of confront him in the meeting rooms. Alfred is really interested in this because it's something that, he didn't expect this guy to be doing, someone who's so strict and rigid in what he does. And he doesn't even know what he says to this man, but he respects Bruce for doing this and for facing his fear almost. And I really quite like that. Alfred is becoming to sort of respect him a little bit more as not just a vigilante, but also as just a man. He starts to respect Bruce as a man. Pretty soon, Alfred's handlers tell him to stop giving protections to the Batman since he's becoming too volatile, and he even tries to push back on his handlers since he's beginning to believe this man is actually doing a good job and he's probably not even needed in the city. A really interesting concept is Bruce isn't perfect when it comes to hiding what he does, or maybe he is, as the party animals soon find a series of his caves up in a high-rise, and this is actually part of Bruce's plans to kind of make himself known to the city at large, as he lures a large contingent of the gang into this high-rise and then sets it on fire and blows most of it up in a controlled demolition, which burns a giant visage of his Batman face into the building, kind of confirming to Alfred that Batman is always ahead of the curve, and now like most of the city know that he actually does exist and is actually there sort of looking after them, but also sort of like looming over them if they ever do anything wrong. Batman's crusade also begins turning the public in his favor, and it's why the former Mayor Hill is running against Jim Gordon again, wanting to get the police and government back up to working order and actually do something about the gangs and the vigilante fighting the gangs. Jim, who caught a bullet during the party animals attack at the town hall, is resting up in hospital, and Bullock is eager to get out and fight and actually starting to sort of like gather resources and like guns and people to sort of fight back against them, but Jim doesn't really want to do that, citing that guns or more guns and more people won't make any difference, they'll just make things messier. And there's a neat bit of visual storytelling here as we see like Jim in the bed and we see his US Marine Corps tattoo, and it makes me think about like how his time in the Marine Corps may have changed him, like what he saw in war he doesn't want for his city or for his people, he just wants to leave that behind. And Scott has brought Jim's military past up in past interactions with the character that he's had and that he's worked on. He's always done little bits of pieces of his military past, and I've always liked it because it's something that I think a lot of writers forget about Jim, that he kind of had a life before he was Commissioner Gordon or before he was a police officer, and adding that in kind of gives him a bit more depth. It makes him more than just the commissioner, or in this case, the mayor. Barbara Gordon is also already on Batman's side, seeing him up close and personal in the town hall, and she knows what he does for the city and's kind of going against her father and against Bullock, thinking that he's actually doing something against these party animals for a change. The argument is stopped by Martha Wayne, who stays to look out for Jim as Barb and Bullock are called off to another party animal attack. Now this is a very fun dynamic, a Jim Gordon-Martha Wayne pairing, which to my knowledge has never been done before. These are two characters who never really interact for very obvious reasons, usually Martha Wayne is dead, and the two share a cigarette and kind of reminisce about old times, because as it turns out, both Jim, Martha and Thomas were all seemingly friends, or at least acquaintances, and I quite like that they had that, and then their kids also had that as well. I assume Barbara also knows who Bruce is, they're around the same age almost, so I like that there's also that dynamic as well. There's like a generational thing happening here, and we actually learn why Martha and Jim are so close, and it's because Jim was the first officer on the scene of the shooting at the Gotham Zoo, and he was the one who actually found Bruce, who was screaming as bats just kind of hoarded over him, biting and scratching him. Jim is actually haunted by the scream that Bruce was letting out while these bats were on him, and it's something that's like kind of stuck with him this entire time, which is really interesting. Scott also uses this as another into Bruce's childhood and how the experience forever changed him, isolating him from his friends and even his mother, and Bruce is racked with survivor's guilt over what happened at the zoo, since had he not won the science fair that gave him the trip to the zoo, then they wouldn't have gone, his father would still be alive, no, his friends would still be there, none of this would have happened, and because of that he ends up tossing away the first prize medallion that he won on that day. I've never really taken Bruce as one to have survivor's guilt, at least not in the mainline universe, since the murder that happened to his parents, it was random, it was like a random act of violence. But here, he is in an indirect way responsible for everything that led up to it. Like, had he not won that, they wouldn't have been there, the gunman would have just killed a bunch of other people or something. So it's very interesting to see, like, this Batman now have this survivor's guilt like hanging over his head, and I'm sure his mother also has that as well. It's a thoroughly interesting thing to focus on for Bruce, and for Scott to find something that he hasn't actually done with Bruce or Batman yet is still so unbelievable. The guy wrote Batman pretty much close to 10 years, and he did various iterations of the character, not just in the New 52 and beyond. And for him to keep finding things like that are not just interesting but fresh and new for the character is just insane. It's just the sign of a good writer to keep finding something new for this for a character who's had 85 years of history. It's insane. Meanwhile, back in the story, Bruce ends up going to his friend's casual poker game, joining Waylon Jones, Harvey Dent, Edward Nygma, and Oswald Cobblepot. I really love the dynamic of these guys here. They all have connections to who they usually are in the main timeline. Harvey still works for the DA's office. Waylon is running a gym and likes exotic animals. Oswald is into some shady criminal stuff, and Edward is kind of like a tech geek, and he's still kind of living up to his name since he's a bit of an enigma since we don't really know what he does, but he is in tech. Bruce, meanwhile, barely talks during their game, just playing poker while everyone just kind of balks at one another, and I kind of like this as like a Batman take. Like, this is him sort of like drinking in information around him. He's staying quiet so he can like sort of gather all these things that his friends are saying, and that's exactly what's happening, as the real reason he's here is made apparent as he's got a party animal helmet, which is revealed to be full of technology. It's not just like a mask you put on, and Edward immediately recognizes it as a GIS, a Geographical Information System, which is an application that the user can use to pick out targets on a private GPS network. So they'll be sent targets and then made to go and attack them. I really like this because Edward unknowingly becomes Batman's tech guy, and that's just so cool. It's really interesting to see how Bruce is working the room here without even doing much. He's just kind of using his friends to get information, seemingly not really caring or participating with them socially. He's just there to get information. Since Edward knows about tech, Bruce asks Oswald about gang-related territory, but the party animals aren't going after any territory. They're just wrecking things for the sake of wrecking things. Next is Harvey, and Bruce wonders if the party animals are in for something political, since it's close to the election and this could be one of the people who are running in the election kind of running interference. But Harvey doesn't believe so, since it's more than just power for these people. It could also just be about money. Boy oh boy, do I love how this sequence is just all set up. It's just Bruce working over his friends without them realizing it. He's gathering all of this information on the party animals and what they could be up to. He's building like a crime profile on these guys and tries to find out exactly what their motives are. And if the final panels of these pages are to be any indication, I'm just going to put a theory out here, but maybe the Joker could be bankrolling Roman Sionis and the party animals, since we learned last issue Joker in this universe is basically the Bruce Wayne that we all know. He's a billionaire, he's traveled the world to all these different places, killed the Legion of Shadows, all of this sort of stuff. So I could see him bankrolling these guys to like sow chaos into Gotham, the city he's from. That'd be really interesting. And it's such a compelling dynamic Scott and his team have created for these characters here. And I just want to know more about them. I want to see more of these poker games, and these poker games become sort of like the hub for where Bruce kind of learns more information about what's going on in the world, but also maybe more about his friends as well and what they're into and how they are itching ever so closely to becoming villains themselves. Bruce is soon put on the trail of former Mayor Hill, who has been taking in a lot of fund capital recently, and he's been working with Sebastian Hady, who's a character from canon, from the DC canon. He's a former corrupt mayor himself in the main timeline, and he's, I think, worked with the Falcones and all of these different crime families. So he's tied up with this Mayor Hill, and he revealed to Dent a thing called the Golden Chest, which is like Mayor Hill's like war fund for this election. So Bruce decides to go and poke around his office to see if he can find this golden chest. Now there's a very cool new design element dropped here, really casually as well, as Batman, instead of, you know, having the cape draped over his shoulders like we're used to seeing Batman, he wraps it around his shoulders and his head and neck, making him look like a ninja almost, like a shinobi ninja. It's a great fucking look, and one that, to my knowledge, we've never really seen before, and never had any sort of design like that, and it really adds to the mystique of him. And I like how they're finding all these new uses for like his cape. It's so cool. Batman infiltrates the office and hacks into the man's computers, and he finds this so-called golden chest that Hady mentioned to Dent, discovering its files upon files of information along with what the chest is actually called, which is Ark-M, as in Arkham. Before Batman can find out any more information, it turns out all of this was a trap laid by Black Mask, who appears on the monitors in the room and tells Batman that he tipped off the cops and the party animals are in the surrounding buildings, and they blast their way into the building to try and get Batman, as Black Mask tells him to survive, and if he does, he can call him. Batman manages to escape down the building's elevator shafts with little trouble and into a tunnel where Alfred is waiting for him, hoping that Bruce will hear him out since he has some information on the party animals that the vigilante doesn't, wanting him to follow him to safety in his car. Bruce, however, has other plans, revealing he's got his own car and the room they are in is actually a cockpit for his own Batmobile, which in this universe is a goddamn industrial-sized mining dump truck, which blows its way out into the streets, taking down all of the cop cars blockading the streets. Now, what a fucking cool take on the Batmobile, since it's the complete opposite of what usually happens when we get a new design for the car, which it often gets more futuristic and sleek, much like how Batman does, but like this universe, how the Batman is big and bombastic, so is his vehicle. It's so very over the top and I love everything about it. It's also one of the biggest gadgets we've seen him use so far, but so far he's only really used like his cape, and there's been like some acid pellets he used in this issue, but nothing really else, and I like that this is like the first big thing we see of him, and it makes me question what other cool functional toys does he have? Does he have a version of the Batplane, or does he have a more traditional Batmobile? I can't wait to see what Scott Snyder and his team are going to deliver for us in this aspect, like what are his gadgets. As the book comes to a close, we get one last hint at Bruce's childhood and how he knows Selina Kyle, who retrieves the medallion prize that he threw away earlier on in the issue, bringing it back to Bruce so they can sort of get to know each other a little bit more. It's very interesting that we haven't seen Selina in the present day stuff. She does get mentioned by Waylon, so I imagine she's still very much alive. I don't think they will have killed her off by now, but it's very interesting that we haven't seen her yet, and I'm intrigued to see what her role is actually going to be in this, since it's hinted at here that she is very much like into cats, or like they give her a very Catwomanish like look in that final page. But I mean, all bets are off. She could be something completely different, and I'm all for it. Absolute Batman issue 2 was another total banger. Everything about this book just hits like crack. It's got a compelling take on Bruce Wayne that explores the character's classic traits in some unexpected new light, and most importantly, it's also refreshing and new. Outside of Bruce, the supporting cast is just to die for, putting characters we've never seen together like Gordon and Martha Wayne, which leads to a very cool dynamic that builds on Bruce's childhood and the trauma he went through, and it also pushes the main story forward in a really interesting way. I cannot wait for the next issue next month, and I'm going to give this issue a 10 out of 10, so check it out and check out the first issue if you haven't. You will not be disappointed.